the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, Episode 16.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R2 Global.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. Real quick, just want to talk about last week's episode. If you missed Gregory Zuckerman, you missed a fantastic interview. And furthermore, if you haven't read his book, you've missed a fantastic opportunity to understand the shale revolution. Now, with that being said, here's how you can find that. As always, you can go to iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and TuneIn Radio and all those places. We also have a new website. You can find the podcast by going to globalenergymedia.com and look in the blog, or you can go to the podcast page, and there is all the shows right there in a nice, convenient podcast player for you to listen to. It's really simple. Now, if you want to pick up a copy of the book, globalenergymedia.com/frackers will give you a link to the copy of the book. Also, if you want to be entered to win, all you have to do is leave a written review in iTunes, and you'll be entered to win, just like a few of our listeners have, and we really appreciate these. And so I just want to call these guys out and give them a shout-out and a thanks. And so first off, we have Nick Gunn. Nick Gunn says, "Thanks, Ryan, for a great podcast. I appreciate that you cover a wide range of topics and have great guests. Keep it up." Thanks, Nick. We will. Next, we have EKT Interactive, which is actually going to be a guest on next week, Doug Stetzer. And Doug's group has a lot of good podcasts, and we'll talk about those next week. And Doug says, "Glad I stumbled upon this podcast on the energy industry. Highly recommend it." Well, thanks, Doug, from you. That means a lot. We really appreciate it. And finally, Seminary Guy says, "After following this podcast for some time, the information delivered by the guest on the show is world-class." Seminary Guy, we appreciate that. We just wish the host delivered world-class information as well, but he is trying, I promise. All of those are 5-star, and so far, all we have is 5-star reviews, which is really exciting. We love that. We love the feedback. Please leave a written review in iTunes if possible, and you'll be entered to win The Frackers by Gregory Zuckerman. If you say, "Hey, I don't want to roll the dice, I want to pick up a copy," globalenergymedia.com/frackers, and there you can pick it up. We'll link to all that in the show notes, so don't worry about that. One final reminder, my trip to Africa is coming up. I leave this Saturday, and I will be going to Namibia and to South Africa, and so I will be posting some pictures, probably on Instagram, and so if you follow or like to be on Instagram, at Ryan Ray Sr., you can see the pictures if that's something that interests you, and if not, no worries. Regardless, I'll be heading out, as I said, on Saturday and returning to the States next Friday morning. We will have an edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast next week. Doug Stetzer comes on. Doug's got a unique product as he's trying to create an e-community for online learning for the oil and gas industry. Good stuff. They have a lot of good shows over there. Highly recommend those guys. And that reminds me, there's two other things. One, we are launching a new podcast. That's right. The Texas Oil and Gas Podcast should go live this Friday. That's the plan. And so you can find the information for that on globalenergymedia.com. Obviously, it will go live in iTunes and Stitcher and all this other stuff as they syndicate. And sometimes that's really out of our control. So I'm not really sure when they will go live there, but we will upload them and wait for them to give us their approval. And so if you go to globalenergymedia.com, there's a podcast page. It will be added there, and you can start to listen to that podcast if you're interested in all things Texas oil and gas. That will be the focus of the show. We will touch on some other things energy-related in the podcast, but myself and Josh Shelton will be hosting that, and it's a weekly news kind of recap. And so I'm going to record that one this week, and assuming I get back from Africa and I'm not just completely slap out, we will have another edition the next Friday after I get off the plane from Africa. So I wanted to make you aware of that. And finally, globalenergymedia.com/jobs. We are working on a jobs page. It is up and is live, and I am actually, as I am working through this edit of the podcast, I'm going to update it right now. And so you can go there. This is not a paid or a promoted site. It's something that we do for free to add value to our listeners. And so go there, check it out, and see if you can find a job if you're looking for a job. And if not, you may have a friend or whoever that is in need of a job. And so there it is. If you find a job that has a link that no longer works, let us know. We're trying to keep it up to date the best we can, but we can't catch them all, as you can imagine. globalenergymedia.com/jobs. We have some more stuff coming up on the website soon, but for now, that's all I can really get into. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's episode where I talked to Karl Kolmsee from Germany talking about smart hydro power. Karl, it's so good to finally talk to you. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay,
How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. It's I'm here in the U.S. and you're on the other side of the pond, as we say here, and so it's morning for me, but afternoon for you. That's always kind of weird when I'm doing these interviews, and so you're getting ready to end your day, and I'm just starting another Monday morning. So, how was your Monday for you? Because my Monday's just getting going.
My day started just as many days with phone calls from the eastern part of the world, which means in our case with India, because we do have many projects in India. Around midday, I usually have some contact with German clients or German suppliers. And at this time, it's when I start getting west. So it's phone calls or Skype interviews with people in Latin America or, like in your case, in the US.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, why don't you tell the audience? I touched on it in the bio a little bit here, but break down what you do at Smart Hydropower.
At Smart Hydropower, we are packaging components for rural electrification. These are all the components that are needed to build up small microgrids. These are generation resources, this is the storage, the distribution, and the meter system. Two of those components are proprietary products. One is a Kinetic hydropower plant. This is a very small hydropower plant, which is good enough to supply 30 households or a small workshop, and which runs with the flow of a river only. So there are no dams needed, and you do not need more infrastructure than an anchor point. The second proprietary product is a distribution system, which works with the hydrokinetic or any other renewable source like photovoltaic or wind turbines, and which is allowing to build up microgrids in the middle of nowhere with a very stable quality of the grid.
Okay, now you mentioned this a minute ago. You're talking to people around the world. So is your target market kind of these developing nations, or is it really any nation that's looking to kind of implement maybe a more smart grid technology?
Well, our target markets are actually those countries where many people are without electricity. These are our main target markets today. We have four market areas, which is India, Eastern Africa, and Latin America, more specifically Colombia and Peru. These are regions with many people not connected to the grid, without any access to electricity. And the fourth market area actually is the US, because the US is developing currently the most interesting market for microgrids. There are many microgrids connected to the main grid, but with communities trying to be more independent from large utilities. And this is becoming a very interesting market, which we are looking for and we are trying to get into. There are three market segments in these four market areas. One is rural electrification, which is basically in the emerging markets. The second is what is called IPPs, independent power producers. This is small power plants in canals mainly, where we generate with 10 turbines or 15 turbines, 20 to 50 kilowatt. So it's a small power plant. And the third market segment is microgrids themselves, independent from hydropower, is whatever renewable resource, building up a microgrid which gives reliable electricity off-grid or connected to the main grid.
Fascinating stuff. And I've got some interest in Africa as well, and so it's good to hear about this technology because there is a lot of push for smart grid technology in some of the rural parts of Africa. And I don't really know how much the audience understands that there's large portions of Africa that still does not have day-to-day power. So it's good that you guys are kind of bringing in a solution that can kind of fill some of those gaps.
Actually, it's not only Africa with a large amount of people not connected to the grid. On a global level, it's 20% of the total population that has no access to 2 billion people without any access. And you're right, we are firstly addressing the needs of these people. And our hydrokinetic technology is specifically interesting for those areas because it generates power all day through. Different from photovoltaic or wind, it's a technology that is generating 24/7. So it brings down the cost of off-grid projects allowing, and this is important, allowing to go into productive use projects. So in our microgrids, they are focused around a main user, which might be a mill or a pump. So we always start with some kind of productive use, and the excess electricity is then going to the people.
Okay, so you touched on several things there. And so you guys started in 2010, and it sounds like y'all have kind of diversified over these past 7 years now almost. How do you see the decentralization of the grid going forward? Because there's a lot of talk here in the States of people getting independent from the traditional power company, and smart grid technology, solar panels, all these different things that we see there. You guys are kind of taking it from a different approach. You're coming from kind of a third world perspective and saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and start this implementation there and then bring it up as it grows. So how do you see that trend as we move forward playing out?
I think at the moment it's still everything very much on an initial phase. And in this initial phase, people exaggerate the role of individual solutions. There are many home storage solutions and kind of connections of home storage solutions, etc. We strongly believe that the new and innovative possibilities with microgrids and with solar home and home storage solutions are an add-on to the traditional utility world. And over the time, we will see a little bit more complex, but very much enriched system where utilities will play a very important, traditional utilities will play a very important role, but individuals will take over specific functions in the supply of communities with electricity. So there will be much more small-sized distributed generation plants, which will be integrated into the traditional play of the merit order in energy production.
You talked about the traditional power company there, utility company. What has their response so far been to your technology? Are they wanting to partner with you guys? Are you seeing a little pushback, or do they not really know where you fit into the picture yet?
I would say at the moment we are still in a phase nobody really knows how things will fit into the final picture. And at the moment we are talking with some of the largest traditional utilities, but we have no partnership yet. We are convinced that in the future, large utilities will enter the market for off-grid electrification and for microgrids, and they will partner up with companies like ours, but specifically they will, and already in some parts of the US, do partner up with microgrid operators. So where do we come into the game? We are, as a startup, one of the companies supplying new technologies, and that's necessary because traditional utilities up to now do not count with that kind of distribution systems that allow microgrids to really operate stable and have new functions towards the consumers and towards the main grid.
With the availability of distributed systems, are you seeing an increase in shared community energy developments? And if so, how do they interact with the established grid and the electric companies?
What we see is that the interesting thing with distributed generation, that it brings down the threshold for investment. In the traditional utility world, people were talking about investments starting with millions of dollars to get the power plant running. In the new world, we are talking about $10,000s of dollars to start with a small power plant. So this enforces the possibility of communities having their small microgrid or their own generation plant. The interesting part starts when utility world and community world becomes integrated. So there's a huge possibility for leasing models. There's a huge possibility for certain services coming from the community towards the traditional utility and not only the other way around. So while we are talking today as if communities, even though they have their own generation plant, require firstly services from the utility, we will see in the future much more services from small grids towards the main grid, which is operated by traditional utilities. And these will not be few communities, but having the possibility to start even with very small investment, we will see a number of agents within the utility market.
Just to follow up on that, you talked about investments. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are looking for money and going after capital, and it seems like this is actually a space with the microgrid technology and some of the renewable energy that's really a lucrative investment right now.
There is a lot of demand. There is a lot, as always, if you have a market with quite a bit of uncertainty, many people will enter that market and see how they can make money out of it. And I believe what is underestimated still is the need of hardware. There are many companies coming up with digital models for a digital utility where some kind of balancing is offered. But the basis for balancing is that you still need some kind of generation plants, which is really generating electricity. And these generation plants do require more investments than most of the people do consider. It's part of our own history and part of our own experience that we started believing we could do that with a very few investments, starting with a famous idea of a power plant. And we found out that developing hardware, being a manufacturer of a machine, always requires some more money than you originally saw.
No, I think you make a good point there. So let me ask you this transition here a little bit. You've worked, around the world, and so you talked about all those different nations and that you've been in. What are some lessons that you can give someone who is in any part of the energy business and they're saying, "Hey, I want to work in these different nations"? What are some of the things that they may want to look at and say, okay, from a political standpoint, from a partnership standpoint, that they should be aware of if they want to go to India or Africa or Central America? What are some of the things that you may say, hey, you need to be prepared to deal with these kind of obstacles?
There was a time about 10 years ago, that was the first time when utility markets, let's say energy markets as electricity markets more specifically, really became international, and large players entered the markets all around the world, like the company I work for, a German company called E.ON. They entered the Russian market, the US market, the Brazilian market, thinking that they could replicate their business model. And the most important experience was there is very little to replicate because regulation has been different. Even the supply market for coal or for gas has been different. And this hasn't changed. Utility markets remain local, and they even became more local over the last years because microgrids are more local than the main grid. But at the same time, the processes, how to run grids, have been more standardized, which means the problems an Indian grid operator is facing are becoming much more closer to the problems a German or a US grid operator is facing, balancing his grid. And the technology that is available for them is much more the same as it has been 10 years ago. So on the one hand, the utility market is as local as a market might be and becomes more and more local with prosumers getting in, communities getting in, sourcing becoming more local. At the other hand, the processes and the general, let's say, playing field is becoming more complex for all of the players in all of the countries, but a little bit more similar. in most of the countries, at least those countries where distributed generation is becoming of any importance.
Okay, two more questions and we'll let you out of here. First is, where do you see you guys over the next 5 to 10 years? You've already kind of expanded your wings and you've been out in the marketplace and you've kind of seen what's worked and what doesn't work. Where are you looking to go as we go down this road the next decade or so?
For us, we came from the hydropower segment with a very small plant, and we love our small hydrokinetic because it's really an add-on to the traditional world and it's something new. We developed the distribution system, and we put a lot of intelligence in the distribution system. There's load management included, there's remote operation included, there is a lot of possibilities for big data and for data processing included. And this kind of distribution system, independent from the source, independent from the hydropower, is something that we see as potential element of microgrids in industrial countries like the US and Germany or other European countries. So we are very much interested in bringing home the technology from the emerging markets where we have all our lessons learned, like the importance of load management, the importance of load shaping, the importance of storage. And with all that experience, we think that we can add something to the utility world in industrial markets, because this is where microgrids, which we pretty well known from emerging markets, become more and more important.
Okay, Karl. Well, we're going to get you out of here with this last question. So we have listeners all over the world, and in these areas that you talked about you worked, and some of these areas maybe that you haven't gotten to yet. Leave them with a final, hey, if you haven't contacted us, if you haven't looked at our technology, this is why, because you guys are doing some truly amazing stuff. We were on your website the other day, which we'll link to the show notes, guys, so go check out that. They have some fascinating technology here that you really need to go and explore. And so leave people that are in these markets that may say, this is interesting, but I want to know more, and why should they want to know more about your technology and what differentiates it from what may be out there in the marketplace already?
Our technology or other technologies that is equally going to the low voltage microgrid level allows new business models to arise. And these business models might be completely different in many markets. It might be a cassava mill, which is linked to a community. It might be a person selling back electricity to the grid when it's mostly needed, like in California. It might be something completely different. And trying out these business models is something amazingly interesting. And we would be very proud to be part of this new entrepreneurial approach in as many countries as possible.
Well, Karl, thank you so much for coming on. And I just want to get on here so everyone knows you have been a trooper. We have dealt with all kinds of technical issues, from bad internet connections and drop calls during this interview. And so thank you so much for just putting up with this and persevering. It's been a pleasure and has been an eye-opening experience for me, and I know the audience. So I want to leave you with a chance to plug and promote anything. Maybe you'll be at a conference or a white paper or just your website that you want to get out there so people know where to find you, where to connect with you, and what you've got going on.
Thank you, Ryan. And I would invite everybody who's interested in looking at our webpage at www.smart-hydro.de, where you will find project references, many detailed descriptions of what we are doing in Colombia, in Zambia, and India, and hopefully in many other places soon. So visit our webpage, and you will find a link to new conferences which we will visit, and you can then meet us very close to your home.
Well, thank you so much. And guys, I hope you enjoyed our interview with Karl. And Karl, before I let you go, I just want to say this, that one of the reasons we have on people like yourself is to broaden our horizons. And it's two things. We want to hear from someone like yourself who's an energy expert, And we want to hear about your product or service that you offer. And so it's always good to hear someone come on who has a great global perspective of what's going on. They can talk about not only their product, it's not just a sales pitch, but they can talk about the global economy. And so many of our listeners find that valuable. So thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you, and hopefully we can connect at one of these conferences in the future.
Thank you, Ryan. Bye to the U.S.
Thanks again to Karl for coming on. Really insightful stuff there, a product that I wasn't made aware of until here recently, and it's something that I think I can use as I go around the world. I talk to different places and inform them about products and solutions that are available to them. And so that's the reason we do this show, guys, is to bring you information. I love the energy business. I love oil and gas. I love all of it, to be quite honest with you. It's fascinating. There's a lot of interesting people in the industry, and there's a lot of interesting solutions and ideas to how we solve energy problems around the world. And I think this is a fantastic idea, and I wish the best to Karl and his company. Now, one final thing. Next month's giveaway is going to be Alex Epstein's book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And we're going to do that a little bit different. And here's how it's going to work. If you're connected with me on LinkedIn, then you're kind of in a good spot. If you're not, you need to connect with me on LinkedIn. We will put a link to that in the show notes. And next month, we will run the competition through LinkedIn. And we will give you the details next month after the episode with Alex Epstein and his book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And I'm just going to tell you now, if you haven't heard his book, if you haven't read his book, it's fascinating in and of itself. And he makes a case for fossil fuels and why they're good, probably more than people would like to let on. And so what I do is I try to play the devil's advocate, and he tortures me. So it was fun. Obviously, I wasn't really in a position to argue against him. I don't really disagree with his position, but it was fun, interesting. And so stay tuned for that. You can find out the details of next month's giveaway by connecting with me on LinkedIn, again, in the show notes. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast is coming out tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Thursday when the podcast is released, which will be Friday, March the 3rd. And so myself and Josh Shelton will be hosting that. We look to hear from you, to hear how you like that podcast and things we might have covered. Texas and the Permian and the Eagle Ford and all that's going on there. There's so much we decided to go ahead and to devote its own podcast, really. And so we're excited about that. And we're excited about what's going on here on the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. We have a lot of things in the hopper. My guys in the background, Michael Sims and Chris Prine, do not get enough thanks for all the hard work they do. So I want to go ahead and say it here publicly. Thanks, guys, for all that you do. And to you, the listeners, we appreciate it. We couldn't do it without you. It would be really weird for me to be talking into a microphone in my room by myself. And so I do appreciate you guys for listening in. And until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.